Manhattan Stardust, Chapter 8, Rapprochement. You may have noticed, and actually I didn't really think much about it until Helena, with her scientific eye, or rather ear, called it to my attention, that a bit of French keeps creeping into my chronicles. "Did you study French at school?" she naively asked one afternoon as the four-star system was lazily rotating around the lounge. Miranda gave me a look. She had studied French, and she spoke French like somebody who had studied it. That is, a bit artificially precise, that sort of thing. Not really, I responded. I had a little Greek and a little less Latin, though. Said Helena. Then you must have picked it up from somewhere, or from someone special in your past, I guess. And she was smiling, quite pleasantly, in fact, but Jennifer and Miranda had pursed their combined lips as they sipped their coffees and raised their eyebrows a few millimeters in my direction. My dad's new wife is French, I hastened to add. She's from France. In fact, she speaks French. Helena regarded me quizzically. That's generally what people from France speak, isn't it? And she laughed again quite pleasantly. What did you say her name was? Oh, didn't I mention? Geneviève. What a lovely name, she exclaimed. And from what you told me about your dad, I bet she's pretty. I cleared my throat. If you like that kind of pretty, I suppose. Do you know her well? Well, once upon a time, Jennifer broke in, Gary seemed to know her very, very well. So well that they had the occasional tete-a-tete in Central Park. So well, added Miranda, that she sang happy birthday to Gary in French at his birthday party not so long ago. Oh, said Helena, that must have been a real treat. When Miranda and Jennifer left the room fairly abruptly, I took the opportunity to fill Helena in on La Belle Geneviève, who was my mother's ex-housemate and a person I merely had some fleeting contact with before she became my father's number. Platonic? She inquired. No, nothing that deep, just acquaintances. I explained that Miranda had a bit of a French inferiority complex and Jennifer a bit of a French beauty complex. Not that I regarded Geneviève as especially beautiful, because beauty, after all, was in the eye of the beholder, and I clarified for her the happy birthday kiss after the happy birthday song, which was wildly misunderstood by the girls. Anyway, Dad's wearing a beret and the two are inseparable. So you and your French phrases are like showing support for your father. Exactly, I responded. That's exactly it. It's just a way of letting Dad know that I respect his choices and that I'm happy for him. It's sort of second nature now. He's lucky to have a son like you, Helena answered, innocent as a cherubim. When do I get to meet your dad and this wonderful Frenchwoman? Soon, I hope. It was sooner than I ever imagined, because when Miranda and Jennifer returned to the living room, they had Dad and Geneviève in tow. Dad had a habit of just popping in whenever he was in the neighborhood, especially on Sunday mornings or Saturday afternoons, but he usually did so without Geneviève. Now, however, Geneviève was at his side and striding into our domicile, every bit the femme fatale that she couldn't help but be even on the worst of days. And Helena coughed up her last sip of Java when I made the introductions. And then they were gone, nearly as quickly, leaving a wide-eyed Helena in their wake, and an invitation to a bash on Staten Island in a few weeks' time. As Dad explained it, it was a grateful client celebrating exoneration. It's not often you get to represent somebody who's actually innocent, Dad said. I want to bring a little class to the proceedings, so I figured Miranda could play the fiddle, something highbrow, and Jen could do a reading from George Bernard Shaw. They'll lap that stuff up. He and his kind deserve it. He, Boris, and his kind, Russian and Eastern European emigres, were, apparently, devoted followers of Herbert Marcuse and ran a monthly book club on the island devoted to the philosopher's works. The group had, however, been infiltrated by an overzealous NYPD and charged with thinking about changing the existing political structure by the violent revolution of peaceful protests. The prosecution cited Marcuse as evidence, which Dad painstakingly ripped to shreds in court in Lower Manhattan. Thinking is still not a crime, said Dad, nor is peace, although they may start to criminalize both soon. Miranda, who was fond of Dad, as was Jennifer, leapt to contribute in any way they could, and before Dad and Genevieve left, they had signed up Emilio as well, who was always keen to preach to the anarcho-socialist choir or anything close. The only fly in the ointment, as far as the girls were concerned, was Genevieve, and as far as I was concerned, Genevieve was less like a fly and a lot more like a siren. I tended to keep a healthy distance. With Shangri-La on its new four-wheel drive base, the last thing I wanted was an unnecessary jolt to the suspension. But Jasper corrected me on that score as soon as he got the news. Gary, you're wrong. That's exactly what you do want, a jolt, or, more accurately, a test. If this thing is going to work, you need to give it a shakedown cruise. Genevieve's perfect. You got to chercher la femme Genevieve, and once you can prove to yourself you can withstand a few hours in the presence with aplomb, you and your Arden will have clear sailing forever. Believe me. Jasp, there are enough women in my life without having to chercher anyone anymore. Come on. Be a man. Real men put themselves to the test. Besides, you're due for a dinner with the old man. Bring me along. I'll test myself, too. You can wrap up the logistics for the party. Jasper had a point about the party, that is. I wanted to get a little more info before involving the girls and myself in anything on Staten Island, a place I avoided the way I avoided Philadelphia. The other stuff was incidental. The worst that could happen would be a few more French phrases in the vocabulary. Dinner was moving along swimmingly. Dad had doffed the beret at the table, and Genevieve had served something I couldn't pronounce but which melted in the mouth. She was also wearing something that might have been poured on rather than donned, and she'd done something with the eyes to make them more molten than usual. But that was all to the good, because I had the chin up and an air of insouciant, unflappable espièglerie, as she herself might say in better French, and it was Jasper who was goggling, which gave Genevieve no end of amusement. Like most sizzling women, she adored gay men and flirted the Adam's apple off my friend with her double and triple entendres. Dad went over the plans for the festive evening. He'd begin by saying a few words about the guiltless Russian he'd successfully saved from a 30-year sentence, and then the book club devotees of Marcuse, before introducing the entertainment. Jennifer was slated to give a dramatic reading from Shaw's socialist drama Candida, followed by Emilio and excerpts from his magnum opus, a poem about class struggle. Miranda would conclude the formalities with a touch of music, after which Dad would open the bar and let the locals drink themselves to death. He advised a fairly quick exit for us. It's my way of giving back, said Dad, pouring out the rest of the third or fourth bottle of wine and easing himself out of his chair. Bedtime for me, honey, he said, giving his wife a peck and a wink. Show the kids out after they clean up. I'd never known Jasper to be what you might call an avid dishwasher, but I guess the thought of extending the evening with Genevieve revived the dormant servant in him, so he washed away with verve and a lot of inadvertent bumping into Dad's wife. I dried, and I watched Genevieve and her damn accent floating all around, and when Jasper excused himself to undo the renal effects of several bottles of wine, I approached her to ask a question about a French phrase or two, which she answered. But when I approached for a French kiss, she backed off. "Gary, what do you think I am?" she said indignantly, resting her hands on my shoulders. "Beautiful," I replied. "You had your chance." And before I could enter a plea on my own behalf, she made a motion in my favor granting clemency and gave me a second chance on the spot, which I clung to with grateful fortitude. Luckily, it was Jasper and not Dad who found us, broke up the clinch, and dragged me outside. He didn't talk much in the cab except to say that I was one lucky son of a bitch and he was one unlucky one. On the bright side, however, was that I had weathered the storm and passed the test with flying colors, because there I was, having achieved that much-needed rapprochement before détente. It would be clear skies and consciences from here on in. I just knew it. Boris's party began a bit earlier than expected because drinks were being served at the rec center before the girls and I had arrived. There wasn't much in the way of victuals except for fruit and nuts, bowls of the stuff set out on the cafeteria tables lining the walls of the establishment. When Dad arrived with Geneviève, he merely shrugged his shoulders at the sight of partygoers slaking their thirsts before schedule. Boris ran over in greeting and lifted Dad off the floor with a bear hug, after which he very gingerly kissed Geneviève's hand like some count out of Tolstoy's Anna Karenina. Then he gave an ear-splitting whistle which brought the mixed and swaying crowd to a low roar and introduced my father. Dad congratulated the man he got off the hook and without further ado introduced Jennifer, who began her dramatic rendering from Shaw. Jennifer might have been reading from a telephone book for all anyone cared, because their eyes were glued on the starlet's physique and their ears couldn't care less. Jennifer wisely took advantage of the virtue of brevity. The applause was resounding. Helena gave her a hug when she returned to our table, while Emilio skipped up to the makeshift stage with a satchel from which he extracted an ominously thick sheaf of papers. For the first 10 minutes of rhyming couplets about the class struggle, the audience was tolerant, but I detected an uneasy restlessness by minute 15, which was, fortunately, just when Emilio wrapped up his recitation, not to applause, but to a lot of murmuring. When Miranda took the spotlight with her legs and violin, however, the glee was rekindled momentarily. She attracted every errant eye in the joint as she launched into Bach with flair. It was, however, one of Bach's longer solo pieces. After a good 10 minutes, she came to a pause, and there was the kind of clapping that said, "Thank you, now let's get on with the party." But Miranda moved right along, sawing away obliviously. The revelers from the working and non-working classes seemed to be stirring, ready to let the applause sound like thunder if given half a chance so they could resume their run to the open bar. But Miranda, immersed in the work of edifying the masses, simply plowed on. She couldn't have looked more angelic as she did so, eyes closed, the mane of hair floating around a fairly beatific and intensely focused face, like somebody out of Botticelli, until a banana landed near her foot. Instead of taking the cue to cut the performance short, she merely dug in her stiletto heels, kicked the peel off stage, gave the audience a glare, and started all over again from the top. One thing I've noticed about crowds, most of them are pretty cowardly when it comes to action, but it doesn't take much for action to be acted upon when somebody breaks the ice or, in this case, peels another banana. One banana skin led to another, and then this led to a kind of clamor I'd vaguely associated with soccer games in England, and when I looked over at Dad, the man whose eyes were generally fearless even before the long arm of the law and especially in court, there was concern. In fact, there was fear, as I fearfully realized. And then there was Geneviève. If her dress at dinner a few weeks before was poured on, the dress she wore to the island looked as if it were a tattoo. She strode to the stage, yanking an unthinking and compliant Jennifer along, and she did something Miranda will never forget. She began to sing, and at the same time she made it very clear to Miranda that she should provide accompaniment immediately, and she did this in a language that was all blue, burning eyes, no doubt in French, which Miranda, being a student, understood exceptionally well. I'll say this. Geneviève knew her audience. Give a left-leaning crowd the Marseillaise, and you've given a concentrated catnip. Give them a Marseillaise led by la femme fatale Geneviève, accompanied by another sultry brunette on a now-rousing fiddle, and a voluptuous actress belting out backup vocals, and I never even knew Jennifer could sing, let alone in French, and you've got yourself a standing ovation with about 1,000 calls for an encore. Helena was agape. When the impromptu trio were finally allowed off stage, Jennifer hugged Geneviève, and Miranda hugged and kissed Geneviève, and I steered clear of my father's wife, but winked. And before Helena could get too chummy with the scintillating songstress, Dad made sure we all got away. Later that night there was a little, how shall I say, extra éclat at the private post-party party for four in Shangri-La, and a lot more Marseillaise. And during a lull in the celebrations, Helena came up for air. "Gary," said she, "how do you say wow in French?" "Don't go there," answered Miranda with a grin. "She's married."